Hi, my name is Ben and welcome to my studio. I'm a sound engineer, musician and videographer from beautiful New Zealand. I run a small scale production company called Mr. Mixalot. So I found myself at a point of needing to buy a digital console, and when I started looking around I realised that there was a lot of options, and I thought the best thing to do would be to get the ones I'm interested in and try them out and share with you beautiful people on the internet which one I like and why. So here we go. So, a quick comparison of the consoles. This is obviously not really a Behringer XR18. I only had it for a weekend and they needed it back, so I gave it back. So this is my beautifully handcrafted vintage interpretation of what it may look like. Behringer XR is a console. It has built-in Wi-Fi networking. It has 16 mic pre's and then a couple of line-in. It has 6 auxiliaries plus your left and right output. You can record the left and right to USB and you can play back from USB. What else does it have? It's a fully featured USB interface as well. The allen&heath QU is a slightly more ins and outs than the XR18. We've got 16 mic or line input plus a stereo in and out. It has 10 auxiliaries, which is the most out of these consoles, plus your left and right. Headphones on the surface, and it has a QU drive USB. You can multi-track every in and every out to a laptop from this, or you can put a USB stick and multi-track to a USB stick, which is a pretty phenomenal feature. The Soundcraft Ui24r is a 20 mic preamps. 8 of them are also on line inputs. It has a RCA input for an iPhone or something like that. Has 2 USBs, one for playback, you can play back things and choose from playlists on your USB stick. One for record, you can record all of the inputs and all of the outputs straight to a USB stick. It's a fully featured USB interface for your laptop as well. This one also has a built-in Wi-Fi access point, which is both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, which is quite good. It has 2 headphone jacks, which is actually quite a useful feature, I think. And it has 8 auxiliaries that can be sort of set up as stereo pairs or in mono. So give or take a few inputs or outputs, they're all quite similar, they do more or less the same thing, and the build quality in all 3 units is very good. The only real difference is that the Behringer does not have Neutrik connectors. It has sort of like a copy connector, whereas the other 2 consoles have genuine Neutrik connectors. And perhaps the Behringer is a little bit lighter and flimsier feeling, but you know, no big deal, and lots of people are gigging them successfully and they're not breaking, so I think build quality, they're all basically on a par with each other. Okay, so my test methodology is simple. I wanted to take each console out on a gig without reading the manual, without sort of spending hours playing around with it. I want to just take it, plug it in, set it up, and I took an analog console as backup in case it was a disaster. So my first gig was with a group called Bill Lake and the Right Mistake. It was a house concert on a fantastically beautiful set of vintage studio monitors as a PA system. About 50 or 60 people there, and I think a great band. So that was a lot of fun, and I used the Behringer. My gig with the Soundcraft was my friends Rose Red, who are a vocal duo who sing with backing tracks. It was at a hot rod show, and it was raining, so we got set up in a little corner, which was sort of a dry spot. And once again, no problems really. The console sounded great and worked beautifully. The second thing I wanted to try was a simple loopback test to chuck a signal through the console out of the output into a preamp and back into my recorder, and that will compare it to a digital file, and we'll be able to see differences in phase, differences in frequency response, and differences in distortion. So let's try that now. Here's the QUSB. As you can see here on screen, there is a extremely flat frequency response all the way up to very high. I mean, probably about 17 kilohertz, and then it rolls off a reasonable amount up the top there. The phase trace is very good, very flat, right up to the top here. There's a little tiny wobble. If you go over to the Soundcraft Ui24r, you can see the frequency response is very flat, once again to about 17, and then it rolls off. It doesn't roll off quite as fast. You can see the phase trace is as flat as a pancake all the way through, slight lift at the end, very, very slight, almost perfect.
So looking at these, there's very little difference between the phase and the frequency response of the two consoles. But I was slightly confused by this because from using the consoles, to my ear it sounded like the Allen&Heath QU sounded analog. It had something slightly analog-y about the sound, and I couldn't explain why. Whereas the Soundcraft sounded to me a little bit more sparkly and perhaps pristine. And then looking at the distortion, it started to make sense. So over here I have the distortion trace for the allen&heath. No, okay. So the distortion is very minor, but it's constant. I mean, it jumps up and down within a very small range over the whole frequency response of the console. I think this here would be no distortion about here. So it's got a constant level of distortion. Whereas if we look at the Soundcraft Ui24r, you can see that it has an extremely low distortion in the bass range, rising up a little bit as we get here to the kind of mid-range. It's approaching the amount of distortion in the QU, and by the time we're up here to the top of the console, it's sort of equal with the QU. And I think this explains the sound difference. The QU is engineered to have this constant level of distortion in every frequency, and it's almost, I suspect that's what gives it that analog-esque sound, which I think matches with what I know of every Allen&Heath console I've ever used. They all have an analog sound. Even the D-Live and iLive consoles sound quite analog, whereas the UI has this sparkle, and I think that's because it's very clean, very low distortion through here, and then a little bit of harmonic distortion on the top end, especially your vocal range around here, which gives it a sound of a little bit of a sparkle. So I think that's really interesting. They do sound different to my ear, and that's backed up by the numbers. I was surprised by how different the distortion trace was, so I actually looked up the manufacturer's specifications, and both of them, these measurements, both fall into the specification perfectly, so I feel pretty confident I've done it right. So that, for me, I just found that interesting. They do sound slightly different, and I think they're designed to sound slightly different, but at the end of the day, it's a very minor difference. And for instance, if you've got a band with a poorly tuned drum kit, that's going to make a much bigger difference to the quality of sound than the small differences that you have here in these consoles.
As we wrap up here, I want to do a quick pro and con for each console, showing what's brilliant about it, what isn't. So starting with the Behringer XR18, it's a lot cheaper than the other consoles in this list. It's easy to use. There's great apps on Android, Apple, and PC. The only cons for me is that the internal gain seemed very low. I had to gain up the preamps a lot to get a good gain structure, and then my auxiliaries were seeming to get close to clipping with only 3 or 4 channels going to them. So I think it's a console you have to run the gain structure quite cold on, which is odd, but not necessarily a bad thing. And I also felt the effects were a little bit plasticky. A lot of options, but perhaps not quite as good as they could be. Okay, so the biggest pros of the Soundcrafter would be that it has a great interface. I think the graphical interface is the best out of these 3 consoles. The Wi-Fi access point is both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, which means it's going to be more reliable. A massive pro for me is that you can plug a screen and mouse directly into it, and you can operate the console without using Wi-Fi at all. And so if your Wi-Fi network drops or fails, you've still got control of the console. You run up on stage and you can still change stuff. The biggest con is that there's a few really strange things. There is no parametric EQ on the outputs, which is really odd. It's graphic EQ only, and I'd like to see that change. In fact, I've reached out to Danny Olesh, who is one of the designers of the product over in Australia, and I've asked him for parametric EQ on all outputs in a future firmware update. It's hard to find cons. It's really just that with the Soundcraft. With the Allen&Heath, the big pros is that it's very well made. You can connect it to all of the other Allen&Heath devices for personal monitoring, for more stage racks, more inputs, more outputs. It's a really good device, but the huge, colossal downside to it is that the control is iPad only. This is a problem for me because I don't actually own an iPad. you can't plug it in, you can't network it to your PC to control it from PC. There is an iPhone app, but it's only really a monitor mixer. You don't have full control of effects and EQ and all kinds of stuff like that. And there's no official Android support. There is an Android app, but it's not supported by allen&heath. So this has really got me scratching my head, because it's a phenomenally good product, but they've cut it really short with the software support, which is very disappointing, I think. The other slightly strange thing about the allen&heath is that 4 of the AUXs are locked to mono. The other 3 can be in stereo if you want them to, or mono. Which I think is an odd choice, because with 10 auxiliaries, you could use this as a monitor console for in-ear monitors and have 5 stereo in-ear monitors, which is perfect for a 5-piece band. So they've limited themselves by locking down the routing, and I'm not sure why. I think it's probably if you're that kind of user who wants network control and more stuff, and if you want auxiliaries that can be stereo, you have to step up to the next range of console, which is disappointing, because this is the most expensive console in the test. So we've reached the end of the test, and the big questions remain: which console is the best, which one should you buy, and which one did I buy? But I think there's a clear winner, and that winner is you and me, because it's amazing to think that in a 4-space rack you can get this much mixing power, this level of sound quality and processing. 10 years ago that would have been an impossible dream, and now it's here and it's affordable. So I guess my verdict on the best consoles would be, I guess it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're a local band, if you just need to get something, get the Behringer. It's $600 cheaper than the other two, here in New Zealand anyway. It sounds great, it's got great processing, and it's a fantastic device. And did I say it's really, really incredibly cheap compared to the other ones? I bought the Soundcraft. The reason is that the allen&heath, it's too limiting to only be able to control it from an iPad. I want to be able to have an iPad wireless out front, and I want to have a networked laptop as a backup if the Wi-Fi fails, and you can't do that with the allen&heath, even though it's probably got the better processing and possibly the better sound. To be able to be at the risk of only being able to control it wirelessly with an iPad, it's too much risk for me. So I have made a bit of a snap decision and gone with the Soundcraft, even though I'm a dyed-in-the-wool allen&heath fan. The Soundcraft has more options in terms of backup. You can network a laptop, you can plug in an HDMI screen and a mouse, and you can have as many Wi-Fi devices as you want. So for me, I just feel safer using it. Like there's a backup for when the Wi-Fi inevitably fails, when 400 concert goers turn up and start hotspotting and using Wi-Fi. That crowded Wi-Fi space is going to become unreliable, and with the allen&heath, there's nothing you can do about it. With the Soundcraft, there is something you can do about it. So for me, that's it. You know, if you're confident with your Wi-Fi, if you have iPads and love using iPads, you know, then it becomes your call. But these are all phenomenal consoles, and you can't go wrong with any one of them. Now, I think I've completely drowned myself in gear geekery over these discs, so I'm now going to never think about it again and just do lots and lots of gigs with my trusty Soundcraft. See you later. Oh, sorry, just realised I forgot a couple of things. I just want to say thank you to Simon from Jansen in Auckland for lending me the allen&heath QUSB. You can check them out at jansen.co.nz. Andrew at Sailor Music Works for lending me the Behringer. You can check them out at musicworks.co.nz. And finally, I brought my Soundcraft through JPro in Auckland, and I really appreciate they're very easy to deal with and gave me a great price. So thank you to them as well. See you later.